My name is Brianna Beery. I am an undergraduate here at the University of Mount Union. I'm a major in neuroscience with a minor in biology and writing. And today I'm going to be talking to you about active and passive voice in neuroscience research. So, active and passive voice is a grammatical concept that we use every day when speaking and writing in English, but we never think about it that much. But we should, as it's a concept that can tell us about our language and what we're doing with it. This is important because scientific writing has rules that one must follow. However, these rules do change on a basis, so it's important for us to keep up to date with the version that we're writing with before we put it in a research paper. But what do the experts say about it? Writing Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is a public research university, and they state that most instructors recommend that their students use passive voice in their writing. However, the University of North Carolina recommends that there are three instances in which a person would use passive voice in their research. The first one is to emphasize an object. The other one is to de-emphasize an unknown subject. And the third one is if your reader doesn't need to know who's responsible for the action. Alvin Pinglion also touched up on what he believes in active and passive voice. So Alvin Pinglion is a lecturer at the Language of Communication Center at the Nanyang Technological University. And he states in his journal article titled The Passive Voice in Scientific Writing Through the Ages, a Diachronomic Study, that the passive voice was used more in the 1880s to 1980s, but there was a big switch whenever it hit 2007, and it was the shift that people weren't using passive voice in their research anymore. They were using a lot more active voice in it. Not to say that any passive articles weren't out there, but the main focus was that there was active voice in there. And then Ernesto Reyes Unenzo, he's a professor and he's also a research scientist in Veracruz, Mexico. And he stresses in his article to not stop the use of passive voice, but to accept the fact that active voice is being used in scientific research. He is a strong advocate of active voice because it's been shut down for a long time. A lot of people have been saying, no, we do not use active voice. We always use passive voice. The researcher is always separated from their research. But he's saying, no, we need to be connected to our research. So while he does this, he also states different reasons why. There's pros and cons to both of these things, but he feels that active voice still wins in the end. He says that while passive voice is traditional, objective, and stresses what is done, it can also be like lengthy and pompous. And then Influenza says that some may find active voice to be unsophisticated because you are putting yourself into your writing because you are the researcher. So he said it might be unsophisticated and colloquial, but it's clear, short, and direct. With my research, I took 20 different neuroscience articles and I read them from front to back. And I dissected every section of it, the introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. And I saw if there was any patterns between the voice that they're using. Are they using passive voice throughout the whole article? Are they using active voice throughout the whole article? Are there only some parts where they're using one or the other? And the results that I found were super interesting. I also made sure that since we are presenting that active voice is supposed to be used more now than it was later, I used articles that were only from 10 years ago. So I started at 2010 and I brought it all the way to 2021. So I was only getting research articles from that point to see if it changed from passive voice to active voice. So So the research matched up with what I found. I found that 74% of the articles that I looked at used a majority of active voice in them, while only 26 of them used passive voice. This shocked me a little bit because I felt like I've read a lot of neuroscience articles and they've used a lot of passive voice. And not to say that none of the active research had any passive voice in it, but a majority of the active papers were all active voice inside of it. So here are some of the examples of how active voice is used in scientific writing. It's a little bit different than when you talk about active voice in general, because in research you're only limited to so much. So a lot of it is using personal pronouns and saying we. So this is one that I found from Sardi, and she and her group of researchers, they were talking about different ways that they did their results and how they did their methods. And they always kept saying we in there, and it was to make it very clear in their research. So you always knew who did it. We use, we trained, or we know. So you know exactly who the person they're talking about is. Next, I have examples of passive voice in scientific writing. I took it from Moana Philo and her colleagues. And usually in passive voice, you take away from the actual researcher. So instead of the researcher's present study, it's the present study used. So the object is doing the action and not actually the person doing it. So table 3 is presenting, not the researchers are presenting table 3. So in scientific writing, it's a little bit different, but you can tell you take yourself away from the passive voice, and sometimes it may be hard to tell who is actually doing the study or who is making all these conclusions. So that's the difference between the active and passive voice. Another thing that I found really interesting is the results section, because even though out of the 20 articles, most of them are active, there's almost a 50-50 between using passive and active voice in the results section. I believe this is because some people take pride in what they found and some people don't. So for example, if you're really proud of something that you found out, it's like, we found that. But if you're not so much, it's the study found that. So it's all in how you take away from the overall study. That's one thing that I found were common trends, were that if it was a negative result, then people separated themselves from their research a little more. But if it was a positive result, they took credit for it and they put we or our in it. So I also did a little bit of digging into the type of journal articles that I was looking at, because I looked at just neuroscience articles in general. However, I did notice a little bit of a pattern whenever I had 5 different review neuroscience articles within the 20. And I found that 4 out of the 5 articles were in the active voice. And I thought to myself, why would this be? My reasoning is because whenever you're talking about a review article, you're talking about an article, a study that's not performed by the actual authors themselves. It's talking about other articles and they're reviewing them. So they have to make sure that you have to be specific on who did this and who did that. So they use more active voice so it's short, clear, and concise. My biggest takeaways from this corpus is that there really isn't a wrong way in how you use active and passive voice in scientific writing. I understand that before it was more pushed that you have to use passive voice, you cannot put yourself into your work, but now it's please put yourself into your work. We want to know who did the study. But as long as you're mindful of how you want to write your data and you're making sure you're clear and concise, then it doesn't really matter how you do it. So thank you for listening to my corpus. I wanted to let you know that even though this was a bigger study, it is not a huge corpus analysis, so my data may differ from what others may look at, but this is the research that I found in my time. Thank you. These are the references that I used.